Good morning, beloveds. I'm going to try and move that back without knocking the camera over. It is November 10th. It is Tuesday? I think it's Tuesday. We'll go with Tuesday. The year 2020, when we lost track of what day of the week it was. So, it is Tuesday. And when I got up and came out of the bedroom and looked out the back, we have a covered patio, and I looked and there were drips on the eave, and I went, oh no! And so I went and I got dressed and I put shoes on and I walked outside, and yes, it had rained, but it was not raining, which meant I got to go for a bike ride. I've had a very productive morning because I got up, went for a bike ride, came home, did my PT, got half my breakfast eaten, and got my knee iced. So I am clicking on all cylinders today, except for the fact that I don't know what day of the week it is. But, hey, it happens, right? So I hope that you are having as good of a morning as I am, or whatever time you happen to see this. So, November 10th, in the month of gratitude, our title is Mind, and our Bible quote is, "Let this mind be in you, which is also in Christ Jesus." And that is from Philippians 2:5. This scriptural passage means that we should recognize the divine incarnation, universal in essence, but individualized in personal experience. The spiritual genius of Jesus enabled him to see that each is a unique representation, an individualized expression of the one mind. The mind of God is in us. The mind of God in us is the mind of Christ. At the center of every man's being is the eternal... Okay. Let me try that again. Let's see. At the center of every man's being, the eternal Christ waits. No. Oh, all right. I'm going to start over. Just right from the beginning. It is November 10th. Our title is Mind. Our Bible quote is, "Let this mind be in you, which is also in Christ Jesus," from Philippians 2:5. This scriptural passage means that we should recognize the divine incarnation, universal in essence, but individualized in personal experience. The spiritual genius of Jesus enabled him to see that each is a unique representation, an individualized expression of one mind. The mind of God in us is the mind of Christ. At the center of every man's being, the eternal Christ waits, knocking at the door of his intellect for admission. This is not a faraway presence nor a future event. The recognition of Christ can come to anyone at any time and under any circumstance. The consciousness that walked over the troubled waters of human experience, the inner calm that stilled the tempest, is accessible to everyone. I know that the Christ in me is always triumphant. I know that Christ in me is one with God. There is no separation, no isolation, no aloneness. There is a divine companion who walks with me, and in whose light I see the light. Okay, and from the Science of Mind text, mind is potential energy, while thought is the dynamic force that produces the activity for manifestation. And that is from the Science of Mind text, page 612. Okay. I struggled a little bit with that one. I kept trying to put articles where they didn't belong, which is why I just said, to heck with this, let's start over. So two things immediately spring to mind. First being, and then they're both gone. Yes, there they are. One being that in Science of Mind, what Ernest Holmes thought, his reading of Jesus's teachings, is that Jesus was the great example. Frequently what we are taught in Western Christianity, and I'm gonna say Western Christianity because Eastern Christianity might be a little different. I've been to one Eastern Greek Orthodox service, and so I'm not going to speak for them. But we are taught that Jesus is the great exception. We are told, I mean straight up told, that we can't live up to his example. And I think that does a disservice to us. We're told to strive to be like Jesus, but to know that we're going to fail. And I'm like, why set us up for failure? That doesn't make sense. Why would a loving God set us up for failure? Why would a loving God set us up so that he could punish us? Which is why, that's why I'm like, no. So that is what we teach about Jesus. We teach, one, that he is the great example. Because he said in one of his many speeches, talks, sermons, whatever you want to call them, all of these things you will do and more. So it's like all of the things that you have seen me do, you will do, which means I am an example. I am your possibility, meaning Jesus knows that we can do this. So he is the great example. He is not the exception. He is not something for us to try to live up to and fail. He is something for us to live up to and surpass, because this is what he believed about us. Okay, so the second thing is and I will say that what we teach is that we teach that Jesus was a man. We absolutely teach that Jesus was a child of God, because we believe everyone is a child of God. Jesus is a man. The Christ is a consciousness that Jesus put on, like you putting on a coat. So, and yes, maybe he came into the world knowing a little bit more than us. Maybe he came into the world a little bit more open. I don't know. I have not met the man, but that Christ is consciousness, that consciousness is available to any and all of us, and that Jesus believed that we could take on that consciousness. So Jesus is the man and Christ is the consciousness. So when we say Jesus Christ, we are saying Jesus with the consciousness, the Christ consciousness, which means that Christ consciousness is available to us also. And that is what Ernest says today. So, and here's where the Bible scholar in me does not, you can tell that I'm not the Bible scholar, because the Philippians, I believe, were letters written by one of the apostles. Maybe not one of the original core, but maybe. So don't quote me on that. But he says, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. We are using the same mind. This is what Ernest has been teaching and continues to teach. That's what Science of Mind teaches. The mind of God and the mind that you use are the same mind. We just use a tiny little portion of it. And God uses all of it. So it means if we are willing, we have access to the whole mind, just not all at once, because that would literally blow our minds. Literally, because we're not big enough. We are small, individualized centers, and we use the portion of it that we are capable of. But it means if we're willing, we have access to any part of it. We can access any part of it at any time. We just can't access the whole thing. So that's when people say, do you believe that you're God? No. We don't believe that we are God. We believe that we are part of God. And it is a very important distinction. All right. For us to say that we are God, that would be ego. For us to say that we are part of God is a spiritual truth that we believe in, that gives us access to. All right. So, this scriptural passage means that we should recognize the divine incarnation, the universal in essence, but individualized in personal experience. So, Jesus is an individualized center of God. Jesus is an individualized center of the Christ consciousness. It is a divine incarnation. But it's a universal essence, and if it's a universal essence, we all have access to it. The spiritual genius of Jesus enabled him to see that each is a unique representation. Jesus said that. All of this and more you will do. An individualized expression of the one mind. So we know that there's one mind, and everybody's using it. Jesus just was willing to use a lot more of it than a lot of other people before and since. He's not the only example. There's been like 27 Buddhas, and they also accessed what we would call in the Western mind the Christ consciousness. They accessed that consciousness. All of your great spiritual teachers access that Christ consciousness. They just don't necessarily call it the Christ consciousness. But what makes it the Christ consciousness? The focus on love. And that's my belief. I'm not going to put those words in Ernest Holmes' mouth, but I would say that anytime you meet a great spiritual teacher, what would define for me that they have accessed the Christ consciousness is their focus on love. The Dalai Lama, walking around today, I would say has access to the Christ consciousness because his focus is on love. He wouldn't say that. I believe, though, if you ask him, he would say, and maybe he has, that Jesus Christ was an amazing spiritual teacher. Okay. He's probably said it because he's huge friends with Reverend Desmond Tutu. They wrote a book together, at least one. If you haven't read it, it's a whole lot of fun. Okay, so the mind of God in us is the mind of Christ. It is a consciousness that we can take on, a consciousness that we can put on. It also means it's a consciousness that we can take off. So the goal is to put it on and get comfortable and not take it off. But we're human, and we're going to allow for that. So, at the center of every, he says man's, I'm going to change that word, at the center of every person's being, maybe we could change it even better. At the center of every living being, I mean, why limit the Christ consciousness to humans? Why not extend it out to all living things? Because yesterday I was talking about pets as examples of love. As loving as dogs are, do you not think that they have access to the Christ consciousness? They just use it differently than we do. That's me speculating. Don't put that on Ernest. That's me speculating. I take full responsibility for that idea. So, at the center of every living being, the eternal Christ waits, knocking at the door of his intellect for admission. So is this one of those times that maybe our intellect is getting in the way, that we are overthinking it? That's, in Science of Mind, we talk about prayer, and we talk about treatment, and we talk about how to be effective in that, we have to take our thought, our intellect, and wrap it in our emotion, our feeling. And so maybe part of what the Christ consciousness is that access to our feeling, because love is an idea, it is a concept, but it's also a feeling. Something to think about. All right. This is not a faraway presence nor a future advent. So it's right there, right within you, right now, and you can access it this minute. The recognition of Christ can come to anyone at any time and under any circumstances. So it can be this big monumentous event, or it can be a little moment. And I think that once you access the Christ consciousness once, the next time is easier. And it gets easier and easier and easier. That is the benefit of spiritual practice, because you're exercising a muscle. And the stronger that muscle gets, it becomes default. It becomes your default setting. It's like you will default into the Christ consciousness as opposed to into ego, for example. Practice, practice, practice. Because practice, I heard this and I like it. Practice, yes, practice makes perfect, but it also makes permanent. The more you practice, the more it becomes a reflexive, a default setting, so that you default into it. So defaulting into a response rather than a reaction. Okay. The consciousness that walked over the troubled waters of human experience, the inner calm that stilled the tempest, is accessible to everyone. Tell me that's not a beautiful way to look at it, because he's accessing, when Jesus walked across the water in the storm to the disciples in the boat, and saying that you have that possibility, you have that potential, that all you have to do is be willing to access that potential. It is within you. I know that the Christ in me is always triumphant. I know that the Christ in me is one with God. There is no separation, no isolation, no aloneness. So, I know that the Christ in you is always triumphant. I know that the Christ in you is one with God. There is no separation, no isolation, no aloneness. And right now, that's really important to hear. There is a divine companion who walks with us, in whose light we see the light. I mean, it's just, every now and again, Ernest has this absolute beautiful way with words. I want to walk with that divine companion. I want to stand in that light. I want to see that light. And what is required of me to do that is willingness. Because the divine companion is there, I just have to be willing to walk with it. So, mind is potential energy, while thought is dynamic force that produces the activity for manifestation. The mind is available to us. We just have to be willing to do the work, the thought. We have to be willing to put in the work that produces that manifestation. Wrap that thought in feeling and go. I really need to go back and, I don't remember what chapter is, because we did 608 yesterday and we did 612 today, and yeah. Don't get me wrong, I read a lot of Science of Mind text. It's just been a while since I've read that far back. A lot of the times in the classes we start way earlier in the book. So now I'm curious. All right, so that is mind, and this is what we are grateful for. We are grateful for that divine example that we have that firmly believe that we have the potential. So our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to hear the knocking of the door and open the door, to admit that consciousness, to admit the eternal Christ that is knocking now. That's our mission. It's like, find that door, hear that knocking, find that door, open that door. Allow the Christ consciousness into your consciousness and recognize that you have the ability, the potential, the grace to accept that Christ, because that Christ consciousness is yours by grace. There's nothing that you have to do other than be willing to accept it in. All right. So I'm going to move into the process of my day. And I'm going to encourage you to do something loving for yourself, do something kind for yourself, do something compassionate for yourself. And today that is being willing to look at the Christ consciousness as accessible to you. But that's my idea. Whatever it takes for you to find loving, kind, compassionate actions for yourself today, please do. We might break some heat records. It's November and my air conditioning came on yesterday. Yes, I know where I live. So please drink plenty of water today. Do something that engages your mind and your body. And depending on where you live, because even here, we're getting some beautiful color changes in the leaves. Go out and enjoy the fall foliage. That will definitely engage your mind and your body and your sense of beauty. Because beauty is all around us in this world, and sometimes we just need to open up and see it and allow the leaves, the color changes in the leaves to take our breath away. And to hear that sound of the leaves on the ground as they skitter across in the breeze. So it's a uniquely fall experience that I do love. And it's a very short window here. So we got to enjoy it while we've got it. So open the windows of your soul. Allow the breath of heaven to show you that the Christ consciousness is yours too. That you have access to it, and that Jesus firmly believed that you had full access to that Christ consciousness and is waiting to welcome you into it. All right, beloveds. Reverend David will be on with you around 5 p.m. I will be back with you tomorrow at 9 a.m. And just before I leave, let me remind you who you are. You are a beloved child of God in whom Spirit is well pleased, always and forever. Have a fantastic day.